Russia-Ukraine news. The United States must show Vladimir Putin that we will not abandon Ukraine. In 1979, a group of radical Iranian students took over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in response to the Carter administration's decision to grant the Shah permission to travel to the United States for medical treatment. The students released some employees from the embassy, but they are still holding 52 hostages. The Carter administration was not successful in having them released immediately. After the pro-Soviet government of Hafizullah Amin failed to quell an Islamist insurgency in Afghanistan, the Soviet Union invaded the country 6 weeks later. The Soviets may have invaded at that time because they believed the Carter administration was too weak to respond to the hostage crisis in Tehran by taking any action. While hostages remained imprisoned in the Tehran embassy until Ronald Reagan took office on January 20, 1981, the United States' primary response to the Soviet invasion was to boycott the 1980 Moscow Olympics. A more recent example of American weakness, the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, is commemorated this week. Since that humiliating event, the United States has done nothing while the victorious Taliban have persecuted Afghans who cooperated with the United States, restricted the rights of women, and generally reimposed the medieval version of Islam that marked their previous rule. When Russia invaded Afghanistan, Vladimir Putin was a relatively junior KGB officer. Perhaps he saw similarities between the Biden administration's humiliating withdrawal from Kabul and subsequent indifference to the Taliban's tyrannical rule and the Carter administration's inability to respond to both the Iranian hostage crisis and the Soviet invasion. Putin invaded Ukraine 6 months after the chaotic American withdrawal from Afghanistan, having concluded that Washington would do little in the face of aggression once again, as was the case when Russia seized Crimea. So far, Washington's billions in military and economic aid to Kyiv have proven Putin wrong. A unified NATO response to Moscow has been coordinated, with sanctions against Russia becoming more severe over time. In fact, NATO has grown as a response to Russian aggression, with Finland and Sweden both considering membership. Furthermore, many alliance members and other American allies and friends have followed America's lead and are supporting Ukraine with military training and equipment and economic assistance. Putin is obviously playing for time in the hopes that the United States will stop caring about Ukraine and that a Republican administration will take office in 2024 and cut off aid to Kyiv. He concludes that this is the reason America's friends and allies are likely to follow suit. Evidence is mounting that many Americans, led by a Republican-controlled Congress, are experiencing what could be called Ukraine fatigue. While 51% of respondents to a CNN poll published in early August said they did not think the United States was doing enough to help Kyiv, 55% said they did. The poll also showed a partisan divide in attitudes toward Ukraine, with 71% of Republicans opposed to providing more aid to the struggling country and 62% of Democrats in favor of doing so. The same was true of an Ipsos poll conducted in June. While slightly more than a quarter of Republicans agree that the United States should stay the course in its support of Ukraine, only 54% of Democrats feel the same way. A growing number of House Republicans are echoing the growing skepticism of the Republican base, which is worrisome but not unexpected. Representative Matt Gaetz's, R. Florida, resolution in February opposing further aid to Ukraine attracted only 10 supporters, but his amendment to the National Defense Authorization Bill that would have cut off all aid to Kyiv received support from at least 70 House Republicans. Recent administration requests for $40 billion in additional funding include $24 billion in aid for Ukraine, and just as many, if not more, Republican members are expected to oppose the request. It is possible that the House will back the administration's request if enough Republicans join Democrats in voting for the supplemental. The approval of the Senate is all but guaranteed. But these changes could convince Vladimir Putin that his early career predictions about America's inability or unwillingness to defend its vital interests were correct. Washington, and Congress in particular, must show the autocrat in the Kremlin that they will not back down on Ukraine and that his assumptions about American weakness and fatigue are completely off base.